Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the World Food Day Keynote Panel, Agri-food Systems for Healthy Communities, hosted by the Office of Civic and Community Engagement at the University of Miami. I'm Robin Backen, Senior Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education and Founding Director of the Office of Civic and Community Engagement. Our office fosters university community collaboration by engaging the university's academic resources in the enrichment of civic and community life in our local, national, and global communities. This year, we're thrilled to be celebrating our 10th anniversary. And since our founding in 2011, we have collaborated with numerous organizations across campus to host events associated with Food Day, which is celebrated every year around the world in honor of the date of the founding of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. World Food Day promotes global solidarity to help all populations make food systems more resilient and robust so they can withstand increasing volatility and climate shocks, deliver affordable and sustainable healthy diets for all, and provide decent livelihoods for food systems workers. This week, our campus will play host to a variety of activities related to World Food Day. Tomorrow, we'll host our annual Fair Food Fair on the Rock Plaza. So join us there to learn about healthy eating, urban farming, and community gardens. Also tomorrow on the medical campus, med school and graduate students at the Miller Urban Food Garden will host festivities celebrating sustainable food systems and the therapeutic power of food. There will be tours of the food forests, crafts to take home, and a planting session to celebrate the day. The event will take place at the garden in front of the Calder Library. And finally, the Office of Sustainability has created a plant-based cooking demonstration virtual library featuring 2 new recipes developed by dining chef Joel Chamizo and plant-based canes. And the videos can be found at the website for Food Day, miami.edu/Food Day. I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners in helping to support both this evening's event, as well as the rest of our Food Day programming throughout the week. Green U, the Abbess Center for Ecosystem Science and Policy, the Butler Center for Service and Leadership, and the Environment Conservation Organization of Student Government. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote panel speakers. Our moderator will be Dr. Imelda Moyes, who is an associate professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Miami, and also associate director for the Global Health Studies program. Prior to joining Dr. Moyes worked as a global health specialist in Washington, D.C., supporting US government-funded programs in low and middle-income countries on various scopes of work, from systems strengthening national reproductive HIV surveillance assessment to developing country health performance indicators. At Dr. Moyes teaches a wide range of courses, including one on sustainable food systems. Her overarching program of research focuses on families and communities at risk. Based on her research interests, she's created a Geography and Inequalities Lab, which is composed of an interdisciplinary group of students and community partners conducting research to understand the health inequities and seeking contributions to develop solutions in diverse communities. Our first panelist is Dr. Franziska Alesso-Bendish. She's the founder and principal of the sustainability consulting firm Better Food Partners and founder of the nonprofit Better Food Alliance. She also serves on the board of the United Nations Association Miami and is the convener of the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit Southeast Florida Dialogue. She holds a PhD in social sciences as well as an MBA and is the author of the book Community Nutrition Resilience in Greater Miami. Franziska is a former corporate executive and Big Four management consultant with over 17 years of experience in helping organizations in the agriculture and food and beverage space build the sustainable food system of the future through strategy, development, execution, and collaboration. As the former Sustainability and Food Chain Partnership Lead at Bayer Latin America, and a former sustainability client engagement lead at PricewaterhouseCoopers, she's created collaborative solutions that are good for the people, planet, as well as profits. Since her experience spans the whole agri-food system, from farm to fork and beyond, she's one of the few people that connects and communicates across all groups. Our next panelist is Roger Horn, who graduated from Cornell University before earning his master's degree in health administration and public health from Virginia Commonwealth University. He's the executive director of Urban Greenworks and the driving force behind their community food security initiative. After his work with Miami's Food Policy Council, he spearheaded efforts to establish city guidelines and permitting for community-owned markets, community gardens, and urban agriculture. He works with groups across the social spectrum and advocates for green design as well as community jobs training. And finally, T. Squire is passionate about all things food related, with a desire to nourish those she loves. With over 25 years of hands-on experience with local produce companies, farms, product development, package design, logistics, sales, organic certification, food safety, and culinary training, she's developed a thorough understanding of food systems and the impact on how we eat. In 2008, T helped form the Miami Grow Project, an urban farm that reclaimed an abandoned railroad track near Miami International Airport. This is where an educational field trip program called Grow Your Lunch was developed to help educate and connect students with the environment and to learn how food is grown. 7 years ago, she was brought on board to develop the Grow to Heal Garden at Homestead Hospital Baptist Health, with the goal of preventative health through nutrition. There are now Grow to Heal gardens throughout the Baptist Health System campuses. So I'm so grateful for all of our panelists for being here and sharing their experiences with us. Following our presentations, we will have an opportunity for Q&A with our participants. So please, if you have questions, remember to post them in the Q&A. And we will be able to get to those after our presentation. But it is now my pleasure to turn it over to our first panelist, Dr. Franziska Alesso-Bendish.
Thank you, Robin. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Franziska Alesso-Bendish, and as Robin said, I am on the board of the United Nations Association USA Miami chapter. I am the principal and founder of the Miami-based sustainability consulting firm Better Food Partners, which mainly works with food and agriculture companies. And I'm also the president of the board of the newly established Better Food Alliance. I have had the privilege and honor to work with sustainable agriculture and food production for about 20 years now. And I was lucky to work with all participants of the agri-food system, from farmers to food companies, retailers, and to consumers. In 2019, I published a book about community nutrition resilience in Greater Miami and how to feed our communities in the face of a warming climate. And this discussion, just the title of this book, already shows that, in my opinion, the discussion about food security has evolved over the past 3 years. It now involves topics such as nutrition, so community nutrition, not only food security. It involves resilience against disruptions and shocks. And if the last couple of years has shown us one thing about the food system, is that it is vulnerable. It is fragile. It can be attacked by climate change related threats, by cyber attacks, as we have seen, by supply chain disruptions, by surges in demand. And any work on food systems is a tremendous opportunity. Food systems are central to the achievement of all 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the related objectives as defined in the Agenda 2030. So when we talk about the challenges and the opportunities of food systems, we don't only talk anymore only about eradicating hunger and reaching zero hunger and a status of no food insecurity around the world, but we're also in the same breath talk about the opportunities and challenges of current food systems related to climate change related risks, to good health and well-being, to climate, I already mentioned climate action, to inequality, and all the other 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So in my work at the United Nations Association Miami, and also as leading the work at the Better Food Alliance, I focus primarily on systemic change. We have a variety of wonderful organizations here in Miami, in Greater Miami, that work on different parts of the food system, such as community access, such as increasing productivity and profitability for our farmers community. What I want to achieve, my mission, is to pull this together, bring the consumer closer to farmers, and thus strengthen the food system through shorter communication, through unified messaging and an understanding. So as I said, working on food system presents a tremendous opportunity, not only when it comes to eradicating hunger. Agriculture, for example, is today one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. But conversely, if we would manage to foster regenerative agriculture, agriculture could actually be a huge part of the solution to climate change. It could help put carbon back into the soil and thus decrease the warming climate. Also, 40% of our food worldwide today is wasted. So by avoiding food waste, by redistributing the food that is not consumed, or ultimately composting it instead of bringing it to landfill, we can have a huge impact on our warming climate, on food security, on the health and obesity crisis that we're facing. So thank you for inviting me to this important discussion tonight. I now would like to hand it over to Roger Horn from Urban Greenworks, and we're discussing data. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Roger Horn from Urban Greenworks. I'm the executive director, as previously mentioned. Urban Greenworks, we started as an environmental organization, just looking to take grass out of and remove grass from people's lawns and replace them with native habitats. We were cleaning the bay and all these kind of things. And then we eventually moved into food security because I was working in the urban inner cities where a lot of kids were going to school, just like I grew up when I was younger, eating junk on the way to school and then having school lunches and stuff like that and so forth. Today, 2021, after COVID hit and so forth, we decided to expand. That's when I took over leadership of Urban Greenworks. I decided to go global because we had limited funds at that time. A lot of our funders backed out, and I was wondering, what am I going to do with the limited funds that I have? So I decided to have it stretch in different places and to look at problems in different parts of the world that would similarly affect us eventually here in South Florida. So I started looking at places like Africa, and I teamed up with some folks in Kenya who was dealing with aridity in Africa and 80 to 85% arid soil in the countrysides, and looking at how can they address some of the problems they're facing in terms of reforestation and also soil regeneration and non-tilling practices and so forth, and also including composting into their farming practices. And the young lady we teamed up there was very proactive and working with a lot of families and farmers and so forth. We also teamed up with some folks in Uganda and then Haiti, and in my country, St. Vincent and Grenadines, which we just had a volcano. So we sent some seeds and some tools there to farmers just to support them as well. And we found that the funds stretched way more than it was here in Miami. And then we started seeing impact. And part of this was because as I took over Urban Greenworks and as COVID hit, I decided to move away from actual physical urban farming and to actually farm for a purpose. And that reason was because I saw agriculture was having such a detrimental effect to the soil and what we were doing. So I started doing a project on the rooftops in the Miami Design District. And I teamed up with a partner called James Brazil. He has a studio called Studio James Brazil. And we started applying technology to what I do. So for 10 years, I've had notes of data and notes of stuff, but I've never really transcribed it to anything useful. So I teamed up with him so that way we could take out whatever I did and make those 10 years become actual and factual in 2. or hopefully 3 years, depending on how long it took us to factorize the process. So we created the Food Academy, and I'll go into that later on in the presentation. But the Food Academy is pretty much our solution to a lot of the things that we saw lacking within the food, within our system here within Miami. We have a lot of green prints. We have a lot of different blueprints for greening and environmental sustainability, but there was never any aspect of it that related to food. And COVID showed us that when you don't take food into consideration, that not just a marginalized, but the entire population suffers. So we started creating and really taking our efforts and putting them to implementable green print that can be added to the existing blueprints of cities and so forth, and look at it not only on a local level, but a regional, national, and then ultimately an international level, and hopefully come together with solutions that can help to solve not just food security, but also food waste as well. Thank you. And I pass it on to T. Squire, sorry, T.
I thank you very much, Roger. Well, as mentioned earlier, I started over 13 years ago creating an urban farm on an abandoned railroad track in Doral, very close to the airport. I worked for a produce company at the time, and we had farms that we were creating in and around the Miami and Homestead area. And I felt a need also, having experienced the school lunches that my kids had to endure, or rather avoid, and see how the other kids were not eating well. I felt it was very important to try to get kids to eat real food, more fruits and vegetables, and enjoy some of the foods that I love to prepare for my family. So that's how we started a field trip program to this site. And during the process over the years, I've just discovered some of the failures our society has in terms of teaching our youth and community how to better nourish their bodies. So one of the things that I found is that people don't know how to cook, and they don't know what the vegetables are. They couldn't name it anything that I've put in front of them. So it led me to create the Grow Your Lunch program, where I would connect the kids to the environment. They would come out, they would taste our whatever we were growing, all the herbs, the produce, and then I would also have them cook a lunch from scratch. So it became a real engaging, hands-on experience where they would come in saying, well, I don't like, salad or green things or tomatoes or whatever, but through the experience of having created, say, their salad dressing or actually prepared their meal, I learned that they took ownership and they became invested in making better choices. This led me to eventually meet key people with Baptist Health. And 8 years ago, they really were looking to do something. They recognized the issues that we had with chronic disease and how nutrition really played a big role in that factor. And I was able to create a program called Grow to Heal, which initially was really meant just to grow food that the food service department could use, the kitchens could use to feed the patients healthier foods. And then after coming on board, I found that we had a huge need in the community to educate about how food is produced, how to cook, how to better nourish our bodies, not just eat food, but actually nourish our bodies. And from there, we've been able to do a tremendous amount of work. We're working on really changing how healthcare approaches wellness and nutrition, and how we can be more preventative as opposed to the traditional reactive process of medicine. So it's been a really amazing journey that continues. We are now at 5 Baptist Health campuses, and it is a a system-wide initiative to help people make meaningful lifestyle changes to improve their health and wellness. So hope you keep watch as I enjoy this journey.
This is wonderful. We're very lucky and very fortunate to be sitting here today listening to you. I think we have great presenters and we can learn a lot from your expertise. So thank you for being here and sharing. And thank you so much for all of you who are listening, who tuned in this evening. We know you could be doing other things, but you chose to be here with us. So thank you for being here. So great introductions. And what is fascinating in listening to you all talk is listening, you're not just talking about food, but you're also making connections. Francisca, when you were talking about what you do, the great work you do, you made connections, between food systems and health and well-being. And Roger, you're talking about all the initiatives you're doing in mobilizing the local communities to improve food systems through, Food Academy as a solution to improving food insecurity issues, but also making the connections to food waste. I think that's really interesting. And Tides, when you were talking about this work, you're working with young people and how you started doing that, helping them to not only work with the land, but to connect food to the environment. It kind of reminded me of this, the news article that was published by the Miami Herald on October 1st, where after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, a group of elementary students kind of came together. They used the compost from the hurricane and started a community garden. And when you're reading the article at face value, you're like, oh my God, this is nothing, anybody can do that. But really 2 months later, we saw that the kids were able to produce enough food to feed 200 people. And to me, that's really incredible. So what do you guys think are the underlying factors that are crucial for us today to improve our agricultural system so that they can be more sustainable and to ensure equitable food livelihoods here in South Florida?
Well, for one thing, it's really one of the things I focus on, the work that I do, is education. I don't think there's nearly enough education on getting more connected to your environment, what's going on outside of the four walls that we're in right now. People just don't know. I mean, it just never ceases to amaze me what they don't know. And I think the more awareness that they have, the more able we're going to have success. It's just really crucial.
That's wonderful. Anybody else want to add to that, Roger?
Yes. Well, ideally, we would like to start commodifying food, would we not? I think food and water, shelter are some of the basic tenets of human existence, but yet it's so expensive for people to eat because we're constantly commodifying food and growing it for money versus growing it for actual people to be able to afford to eat. And that's why we have a lot of the food waste that we have. So if we'd stop doing that and change up our practices and actually learn to grow food for the populace and grow it at an affordable rate that folks could actually afford it to feed their families and stop growing it to make people rich, then we'll make a big step forward in that direction. And then second thing is, I always have a thing with agriculture in the world that we have it now. Agriculture is the reason why we're in this place. The monocropping, the practices that we've used in agriculture, right? We've continually to suck and take out of the earth and not do anything to replenish it, right? We're continually take from the soil, we're adding fertilizers and chemicals and this, but we're not doing none of the great things to create the microbiome that was in the soil in the first place that allows it to be rich and to grow good, healthy, nutritious food. We're destroying our water systems. We're pulling from our aquifers. So we have to stop doing these unsustainable things that we consider sustainable, and that's destroying, and stop leveraging the resources of the future generations like we've been doing for hundreds of years here in America, and start actually owning our responsibilities as a society and stop on our future generations. I don't want my kid to have to live up for my responsibility, for my mistakes. He's 6. You know, why would he have to live that when he's 26 and living for the things that we do here now? So we need to take responsibility for our stuff, stop doing the same things we've been doing over and over again and calling them sustainable. Stop creating the same agricultural practices and making a twist on it and calling it sustainable because it's profitable, right? While at the same time, it continues to destroy the environment, destroy the earth, destroy the quality of our food. I mean, it's already said that we have maxed our seed capacity to its limit. Right? Our seeds can no longer be altered and shifted and changed to regulate for temperature and all of that stuff. So we have to stop doing that, because now the seeds aren't producing at their capacity. They're starting to produce less fruit and less production than they were before, 100 years before. So we could be planting all the seeds we want, we're still producing less food because of our practices. So we have to intrinsically look at our core practice and do a complete 180, because to do the same thing is insanity.
I want to pick up on that, because very often I hear the conversation talking about big ag and that farmers are just in it for the money and so forth. And I just want to shift this a little bit, because when we talk about sustainable diets and equitable livelihoods, we're talking about, let's be clear, a low cost sustainable diet, correct? So we have to achieve a balance between food that is relatively cheap so that everyone can afford it. Otherwise, it's not sustainable, cannot feed large amounts of people. But then also we want it to be sustainable, ideally regeneratively or organically produced. And that is, in a way, a challenge that we need to balance. In my work with farmers, I can say that farmers inherent, not everyone, of course, but to generalize, want to be stewards of the land. They have an incentive to take care of the land, to take care of their soil, because they want to farm the land for future generations and for their own family to take over. They realize the change that the threats that climate change brings, and they live with this volatility of commodity prices, of climate change, of the weather every single day, and try to adapt to it. And then at the same time, they also run businesses. So they have to achieve livelihood for their own family and for their own agricultural community. So they are at the intersection, exactly at the intersection of what makes economic sense and what's the right thing or the sustainable thing to do. So what T mentioned before, education, as much as we need to educate consumers about what their choices, what impact their choices have on the environment and on communities and social aspect, we also need to help farmers understand this new volatility related to climate threats. We need to help invest into research to provide them with the right genetic materials, the right seeds, as Roger mentioned, in order to produce for this new environment. And we have to provide them with financial incentives. Us as consumers, we need to realize that we vote with our dollars. So looking at labels, looking at where our food is coming from, and then making our choice based on that has a huge way of providing financial incentives to the farmers that do regenerative agriculture, for example. And then we can talk about agriculture subsidies, maybe not in this forum, but additional income factors as well. That we
Hold on a minute, 1 minute there, Francisca. Not to cut you off, but that's still talking the same thing I'm talking about though, right? Because you're still talking about the big growers. Small farmers are the largest producers and the largest sequesters of carbon in the world, right? But we do not support small farmers with our money, right? There's over 1 million small farmers around the world that have done way more than the big farmers and so forth. And they don't require a lot of money for their food. They don't require large gains and large things. They just require enough for them to sustain their family and so forth. We know them all. We know them in all the Caribbean countries, all South European countries, all of them. So there's now big commodity that those small farmers make. The commodity growers or earners are the big ag, the Cisco's and those guys, you know what I mean? And the Monsantos who are monopolizing these markets for monetary gain at the risk of our own health, right? They're not creating a better product.
But it's
right?
not all black and white, Roger. It's not only that you have a 1 hectare farm or you have a 100,000 hectare farm. It's also farmers in between that supply to to produce aggregators, that supply to their local grocery stores, that we have to support with transport. And so I believe we have to be a little bit more nuanced. And what I'm talking about is the food that reaches our food system, that reaches the consumer. And this is not necessarily the food that is produced by a subsistence farmer.
I understand that. That's exactly where we've gotten away from, is because all of the research shows that in order to reverse what we've done to the environment, we have to go back to the subsistence farming, where we have smaller farms in localized communities and so forth, versus these large corporations that are shipping food 3,000 miles across countries and creating big environmental disruptions. They cannot continue to use this as the marker and saying that they're creating global food shortages or global food things when we have global food shortages, and these companies are creating massive amounts of food and wasting massive amounts of food at the thing of money. It's not feeding the people. So there's no reason. I have colleagues who work at Monsanto's, and they told me all the time as an entrepreneur, like, why don't you just go to the farms and get the food? There's so much food waste. They're just growing tons and tons of food, and the small farmers who are growing foods and the intermediate farmers are losing out to the bigger corporations because they're buying out the food. I know the game that's going on back there.
So it looks like it looks like we know what the problems are, right? And I like these perspectives, right? Because Francisca, you're kind of trying to talk for both the small farmer and the corporations, and Roger, you're advocating for the small farm. But what I'm hearing is we know what the problems are, and these problems are not new. So the question is, why haven't we done anything to stop this? Or whose responsibility is it really to put checks and balances, so to ensure that what we are discussing here doesn't happen?
I personally think it's the citizens' responsibility. I see a lot of people who claim that we don't know what to do to reverse this process of global warming and all of that. You have those people who don't even believe in it. And I think that citizens need to stop putting our rights and our civil rights off to government. We've been doing that since 1999. And we need to stop doing that and stop having the government choose for us. We have a choice. We could tell supermarkets what not to put in the stores. We could tell Whole Foods we don't want them to bring food from South America. So we can choose these things. We've done it before, yet we choose to believe that we have no impact on the decisions that are made in our society that affect us. And we have to stop coming from that defeatist mentality where it's like we're a child and our parents are telling us to do something and we don't have any say in it. So I think the American psyche needs to change, and we need to start being more interactive in our government, more interactive in what's going in our mouth and what's going in our food, more interactive in what your children are eating. Because if you care that much, then care about what they're eating, and then you'll care about what you're eating because you'll have to eat the same thing. But we have to change our philosophy and stop depending on government to feed us. We can stay where we've done this, and it's crippled human society.
Ty, what do you think?
Because we've allowed, I'm sorry, actually, sorry.
Well, I'm with Roger in so many points, and I think, you'll hear me say this over and over again. I go back to education and engagement and inspiring our community, our citizens, to feel empowered that their wallet makes a difference. The little things, reading labels, and the fact that if you can get 20 people to walk up to Publix produce manager and say, why are these tomatoes imported when we have them in season right now in February? How do we empower our citizens in the community to feel that they have they're entitled to this, and that they can make a change, and that it makes a difference. I think we can do it. And it takes time. I mean, we're in this mess because of, you know, at least 70 years of corporate development and, you know, marketing and all science and technology and all of these things. So we can't change it in a year or 5 years. It takes time. Part of the work that I'm doing with Baptist is exactly that. And I can't express to you the bureaucracy and the levels and it's a huge machine. And that's just one corporation. It's a big Florida corporation, but in terms of the United States or globally, it's not that big. But getting the ear of the right people, finding the right people to speak to, finding, in my case, I had the one champion who hired me. And then through our work, we found other champions within Homestead Hospital, then within Baptist Health. And it spread. It's taking time. I mean, I just celebrated my 7th anniversary with Baptist, and I still have a lot more work to do. Let me tell you, I don't think retirement is in my future anytime soon. So, but it takes time, and it takes patience and perseverance, you know.
So we even got a question here from one of our listeners, and Francisca, you talked about low-cost system, finding a low-cost system balance for food systems, and Ty, you talked about working with young people and pushing them to make these connections so that they can focus on diets. And Roger, the work you're doing is also in there. So the question is here, I don't know if you've read Michael Pollan's recent book, and the question is really like, okay, so yes, corporations have a problem, but we are also dealing with a young generation who do not like to cook. This is all in Michael Pollan's book. So even if we produce a lot of food, but people don't know how, you know, they don't want to cook. So how can we get them to get interested in agriculture or fresh food, really? How can we fix this so that future generations learn and enjoy cooking again and be able to appreciate agriculture systems?
I'll take this because I teach kids and adults and all sorts of people how to cook all the time. And I will tell you, I do a lot of myth busting on time and money. Okay. When nurses, when doctors say, well, my patient doesn't have the time or the money to eat healthy, that's just an excuse. It's the easy out. It's easier to say it's too expensive and I don't have time than to maybe take a little bit of time to learn a few simple tricks or techniques, and then organize what you want to eat during the week with the budget that you have. I work with patients who are on SNAP. One patient in particular was sent to me because they couldn't make it to the end of the month because they would run out of money on the 3rd week. I spent 2 hours with him, gave him a lot of tools and tips and guidance, broke it down for him. And then 3 months later, the nurse called me and says, you know, I don't know what you did, but now he can stretch his SNAP dollars till the end of the month. It's a realistic goal, but it takes work. It takes an effort. So the question is, how do we inspire people to make the effort and not be lazy? The reason why we're sick is because we're eating processed foods, which means we don't have to cook, and we've become lazy.
Yes.
The big corporations have trained us to be lazy. So we without the hard work, we will not get the job done. That's the bottom line, in my opinion.
I could only speak from my experience and my laziness. And I am a New Yorker. I eat out a lot here in South Florida. I eat out way more than I should. And I grow a lot of food. And that's the sad reality for me, is that I know the economic numbers when I look it up on my budget at the end of the day, the end of the month. I know that my go out budget is 3 times or sometimes 4 times more than if I just took my vegetables that I grew or that I bought in the supermarket and cooked the meal. And that lie about it takes too long, T is very right? If I just dress up, I get out to go to eat, half an hour to do all of that, half an hour when I sit down to order, that's an hour it took me to get my meal, right? I could have done that in 20 minutes at home and so on. And that's the reality, is that we have become accustomed to the excess and to the amenities that we have in life as Americans. And I'm one of the big examples of that. And I preach that to the folks that I work with. I'm like, I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you that I'm the best example of what you should do, because I know better and I don't do better half some of the times, you know what I mean? So I'm that example too. So, and I think that's where I get across the message more, that it lets folks know that they're human, you know, and that we do have to work at this. You do have to continually work at changing your habit. And that's what I try to tell people. I'm like, I can't go and tell a family of 4 that they all have to eat the same thing, because they're all 4 different people, even though they're from the same family. So the way I look at it is, I'm like, I try to get folks to eat individually, and I get them to look at their individual health. What does it require for you to feel healthy when you get up in the morning, and so forth. And that's where that starts with me. And then we start educating them on what their body needs versus what everybody needs. And I think that's the most important thing, is that once we have distance ourselves so much from a personal responsibility to ourselves. You know, we look at everything else but ourselves. We spend so little time getting to know ourselves, judging ourselves, criticizing ourselves. That's why society is so sensitive nowadays, because no one wants to judge themselves when they go home. Yet when somebody says something to you out in public or says something, your feelings are hurt and everybody's in an uproar. So we have to go inwards, and we have to really define who we are as individuals and bring that and start bringing it out again. And I think that's one of the things we lost over the past couple of years in America, is that individuality that truly made us Americans, that made us that melting pot that we've come to read about in history and all of that stuff. And now we've become just one big blob, you know, and we have to change that. And I think if we educate, like my island just went through a volcano, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, right? It wasn't a volcano, it was a threat of a volcano. I left St. Vincent when I was 8 years old, when the volcano was actually threatening to erupt. And my great-grandparents said, you got to get out of here, right? I saw the lava coming down the mountain, and I was running for my great-grandmother and all of that stuff. These cats had some smoke and they went into a panic. You know what I mean? And then on top of that, they did none of the things that we did in 1979. They didn't save water, right? They didn't store any vegetables in their silos or in their pantries, none of that. So when after everything was covered in ash, they had no water and they had no food, and they had to turn to America and all other foreign countries for food. We didn't have to do that in 79. But in 2021, when we had so much technology and so much thing, I had one TV channel when I was a kid. We had a phone we used to have to ring in to the operator. She has to pick up the phone and ask us who we're calling, and she used to have to dial it over to. I mean, I'm that old to experience that, or I'm that young to experience that because I'm from that country. And yet in 2021, with so much technology, here we are having to depend on another country for food. That is ridiculous. And that's the main problem right there. Technology has limited our ability to feed ourselves.
So when we talk about,
so you work internationally. Do you think this is an American issue, or this is a global issue? That, you know,
it's a global issue. In my country, I mean, they're telling people you can't kill a cow or a chicken anymore unless you buy it from a country that has shipped it in from the US or some foreign country. And then half of that food is old. The dates, my cousin and my family, and they send me the dates in the supermarkets of old food, but yet you can't kill a chicken in your yard, or you can't kill a goat or a cow anymore. And this is what these countries are preaching. You have to import this bad food, this processed food, and to grow and kill your own food and to prepare your own food now. And that has become a global. When they came up to America and they were looking at my garden here in Liberty City, I'm trying to push them fish and tilapia. And they're talking about growing food. I'm like, why do you want to grow food? You guys are in the islands, you guys grow food all the time. only to understand that there's this system that's being pushed on them where they are not being incentivized or they're being forced to not grow their own food. And urban agriculture is now becoming a thing in the Caribbean. And that's ridiculous.
Francisca, you're going to say something?
Yeah,
Thank you,
so
Roger.
thanks, Roger. Food systems are global nowadays. I mean, the majority of the food we consume, as Roger said, comes from other countries or other regions of the country, is imported, exported, and that's driven by consumer demand, right? We want berries all year around. So where do we think the berries come from in certain months of the year, and especially here in Florida? So, however, what is different, and the way I'm perceiving it, is the awareness on the side of consumer and the actions that are being taken in the other sectors. So when we talk about how can we address these challenges and improve the sustainability, resilience, and inclusiveness of food systems, yes, we're talking about the consumer, and I agree with everything that T and Roger said about consumers having to take responsibility and having to buy, support certain products with their dollars and so forth. However, we can also not forget that this is such a complex system and such a complex challenge that consumers cannot do it alone. So we have to work together. Academia needs to help in order to provide research, in order to have more genetic variety of seeds. The private sector has to contribute with innovation and resources and funding, and many times the public sector has to provide policy frameworks and directives in order to foster a system that provides healthy and sustainable food. So it's not only the consumer. And if we went into a supermarket and there were only great choices, so imagine a world where we went there and the shelves were stacked with healthy, nutritious, and low impact food products. And that could be enabled just by the private sector and the public sector working together, right? So we also, or other sectors, have the responsibility to educate us and to force certain choices onto us as consumers. So when we're coming back to your question, are there differences? Yes, I see differences in the awareness of consumers when I go to Europe and look at eco-labels, at certifications on certain products. I see organizations talking more and more about the environmental impacts of diets and so forth. I see in the private sector a lot more activity, and I would say Europe is easily 10 years ahead in the private sector when it comes to sustainability in food and ag than the US. We may argue why that is, but there are certain differences. But we're dealing with a global food system, so let's take this as an opportunity and take learnings from other countries, such as Roger is saying from his island. Let's take learnings from other countries, import these learnings, and make our food system better here on these parts where we are.
All right. I was on the Caribbean had a food thing too last week that got cut short. And they had an English professor on there talking about how the consumer controls everything and blah, 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 blah. And that is not true, because it's proven in these Caribbean countries that the consumer was forced to take what was sold to the government and what deal the government made with whatever country they were shipping the food with. So the government made the deal and the consumer was forced to eat it, because then the government levied restrictions on this consumer and made them have no choice but to eat the food that was available there. So that's not true. And then they were then trying to tell the farmers how to grow food for these consumers in England and Europe and all of that stuff, and how they have to have all of these regulations and stuff, when half the food that the farmers grow in the Caribbean is healthier than the food that they have in England. So my whole thing was, how you guys have no ability to grow food, and your food is worse and your environment is worse, but you're telling the farmers who actually grow healthy food in the Caribbean how to grow food for you, to healthier, so it could meet your cross standards. That's the hypocrisy here. And that's the problem, because food is not a difficult problem. It's not complicated. It's very simple. My son, once he got of the age of recognition and he was 1 year old, there's nothing I could have put in his mouth that he had to eat. If he didn't like it, he was not eating it. Food is that simple. right? But because we want to put money behind it, it becomes complicated. Of course, it becomes complicated. Every time you put money behind something and you're making money from it, it becomes complicated, right? But no one wants to talk about not making as much money from it, right? Because they still want to continue to push this garbage of food that they think and continue to push it on people. Why? Let's go back to healthcare. T's working in healthcare. I studied in healthcare because healthcare has become the largest driver of the American economy, right? So the American economy makes most of its money then from its citizens dying than from its citizens living. And that's the fact right there. That's why the food contributes to that. The food is in league with the healthcare companies and they're in league with the pharmaceutical companies, and they all are living off of the dying American citizen. And that's the truth. And when we start facing that fact as citizens and understanding that none of them have our best interest at heart, right? They all want you to die. That's why when you have your tertiary procedures and your healthcare, and you paid all your healthcare benefits for the past 50 years in your job, and now you have a stroke and you have cancer, you can't get the treatment because they don't want to fund you, and they blah, 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 and the experimental treatment. I was in all of that, and the DRGs and how they're writing it off. I was there for 10 years in the healthcare field, and I saw how they lived off of us and how they weren't trying to make better off of us, and they're just trying to live off of our poor health. Right? Why is it less costly for them? Why do they not push preventive medicine like what T is pushing? Why does it have to spend 7 years to push that? Why? Because they don't make money off of that. The money is made on the tertiary procedures, the cancers, the transplants, all of that, right?
I want to continue on that one, but also not to forget T mentioned SNAP. I want us to kind of talk about that for a little bit. So millions of children rely on food assistance programs in the US. That's a given, to alleviate food insecurity and hunger each month. However, these programs have been criticized as not being sufficient. And we know that the Biden administration took that to heart, and within 2 days of him being sworn in, he started creating initiatives to promote, to address those issues that come with these programs that support, like SNAP, WIC, to mention a few, and most recently extended the SNAP program. But these criticism are that we are not doing, this is great. Well, this is great. So it's a right step in the right direction. There's a call that we need to do a little bit more. We need to not just stop on making sure that we're addressing the food security, but we should be also addressing nutrition security. So you all work here at home in South Florida. How do you think, what are the steps that need to be in place for us to start focusing on nutrition in addition to food security? You mentioned laziness, people not cooking, eating chips, giving your child chips instead of giving them a glass of milk. What do we need to do in order to ensure that we have both food security and nutrition security in homes, particularly in low-income households?
Who wants to take that one?
I can't take it. I don't want to.
And
Well, I'll make one comment in terms of SNAP, and I think Roger's more involved with this than I am, which is policy. Yeah, I think it's, SNAP stands for what? Supplemental nutritional, so
Assistance program.
in my mind, in my opinion, and since it's with my tax dollar, I don't understand why we allow the recipients to buy non-nutritious foods, blatantly non-nutritious, sugary drinks, chips, candy, all of the things that we know are not nutritious, that are actually nutrition void. So, I think, that becomes a larger conversation with, sugar lobbyists and that sort of thing. But I think we really need to talk about that. And it needs to come to the table. And at some point, we're going to have to face that as a huge part of the problem. SNAP recipients, from what I've observed, spend a tremendous amount of money, if not all of their money, on hyper processed foods, which are nutritionally void, and filled with synthetics that increase inflammation, and inflammation invites disease. So we're actually subsidizing diabetes and heart disease through these efforts. And it is one reason why Baptist brought me on to do what I do, because we're trying to combat that. And to Roger's point earlier with the healthcare system, it is changing slowly, painfully slowly, but there are more healthcare systems that are working towards this goal. It has become too expensive, particularly in areas like Homestead, where I work, where the demographic is so poor, underinsured or uninsured, and extremely ill. We're not making any money in these situations. So unless you're a plastic surgeon or doing some really high-end frivolous work in medicine, I mean, that's where the money is. Yes, absolutely. But in these sectors where the communities are so much in need and really undernourished, it's just a huge, tremendous battle. And it's the saddest thing I think I've ever had to witness.
See, on that level, they may not be making it a lot of money, but what they're making it on is value, right? They're not making it on a big ticket items. They're making it on 1,000.
Well, not in the case of Homestead Hospital, no, because the underinsured or the uninsured, we're not making, we make the government pays pennies on the dollar of what the cost is. So in this particular case, no. Now, if you're well insured, that's perhaps, you're kind of breaking even as a hospital, but it's kind of region by region. And definitely with the increase, even if you're well insured, if you're extremely sick, the expense is just through the roof for the hospital even,
As an administrator, I have to tell you that all hospitals make their profit line at the end of the day. But in terms of SNAP, we have to look at who SNAP addresses, right? The elderly gets the fewest amount of SNAP dollars, right? And technically, they should be the healthiest because they're the ones who eat the healthiest. They have the healthiest lifestyles and the healthiest mindsets. But then when they get their fewest SNAP dollars, or the fewest SNAP dollars, then they have to eat poorly because they have to make those limited dollars stretch longer for the month. The younger families get the most SNAP dollars. The younger families with the most kids get the most SNAP dollars. So they go buck wild on their food and they can buy whatever they want. And it's normally not healthy because they're not educated, like T says, to buy healthier foods and prepare healthier foods. And plus it's just quicker to just prepare healthy foods so they could, whatever, have the kids microwave something and whatever. I mean, we microwave Hot Pockets all the time when I was a kid. So, but we have to train them, educate them to eat healthier. And that is the process, and that's the longer term process. How do we help? SNAP, obviously, if we looked at the SNAP recipients, they're probably the most unhealthy population in all of the health statistic populations out there, which is an oxymoron in and of itself, and the government should be ashamed of that. And T is right, because back in the day when I was younger, my mother used to always tell me, she's like, these programs aren't supposed to be a crutch. They're supposed to be an aid to help you move on to something better. But what these programs are becoming are crutches. And you have generations and generations of families on these programs, and thus the state that they're in and the state that families are in these marginalized communities.
I'm personally thrilled, Imelda, to your question that the current administration is actually adopting the term community nutrition security. I wrote about it in my book already 2018, and it was a very new term. And now it changes the whole conversation. When for years and years and years, we've always used the term food deserts, for example, or have looked at people that work in local income communities that live in certain food deserts or more than a mile from the next supermarket or grocery store, and in rural areas, I believe it's 10 miles. But this doesn't tell us about their nutritional status or their food access or their food security status, because when we look at the available produce in supermarkets as opposed to grocery store, corner stores, we see that some corner stores don't even offer healthy options such as fresh produce because they lack the cooling capacity, because they lack the shelf space, and they just rather give it to high calorie foods that are more in demand and so forth. So when we're now looking really at nutritional status, this will change the focus that the public sector and then also the private sector eventually through incentives and punishments will address the food security or nutrition security now in low-income communities. And to the point of pricing as well. So it's not only the availability and in terms of physical availability. When we look at supermarkets and compare them, the supermarket in an affluent neighborhood with a supermarket in a less affluent low-income neighborhood, we can see that the prices for fresh produce are sometimes 15% higher in the low-income neighborhoods than in the affluent neighborhoods, just because demand is slower, just for many reasons. And that just cannot happen. And so I'm very glad that now the focus is shifting and the conversation is shifting and actually looking at nutritional value.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes. And I'm glad Roger, go.
Sorry, something else randomly I just wanted to say about that. We have to relook. Since COVID, I've been smacked into reality that community is a word that's used to describe Black people. And I didn't really realize that. I thought there was actually a community of people that cared in America about stuff. I did not know it was being used to describe Black people and marginalized people. I thought there was an American community of us all and so on. So now it's a new word. And I have a professor at the University of Michigan, and we used to laugh at the term food security, and he used to hate me using it because he knew it was just an economic driver for folks like myself to go after grant funding and stuff like that. Now there's a new word for it too. So my thing is that America as a whole, right? The world as a whole is food insecure. And we got to stop looking at it as Black people and poor people. It's not just us, it's everybody, right? The food that we are growing is not nutritionally dense, right? The food that we're calling organic has only about 35% of the nutrients in it that is required for that plant. And the food that we call non-organic has about 15, right? So whatever we're taking in, no matter who's eating what and who's eating what vegetables, unless you're eating some super microgreens like tea was growing on the railroads, you're not getting the nutrients that you need. Right? So you could eat all the vegetables you want and all of that, you're still not getting it. So America as a whole is food insecure, and we have to change around how we grow our food and the nutritional value of the food that we offer Americans. And when we start changing that and changing what is offered, then we'll start seeing the health of the population increase as well.
And I have a participant question here. You've addressed it, but I'll come back to that. But this reminds me some of my work. I've done work in Illinois looking at availability, because Francisca talked about it's not just the physical availability of food, and I totally agree with that. Some of my work focused on looking at commonly consumed fruits and vegetables for African Americans and Hispanics. And we surveyed all grocery stores, and we found that those food types were not available in some of those areas. So just because we have fresh fruits and vegetables in some of the groceries doesn't mean that those groups, subpopulation that eat specific foods, if you don't carry them, it's not available to them.
And then the vegetables are so nutrient inefficient. Anyway, might as well eat your junk food. It's the same stuff. So you might as well eat it.
I think I need to jump in here right here. I'm not a registered dietitian, and maybe we should consult someone here, but I'm pretty sure that eating a diet rich in plants and fruits and vegetables is
I'm not saying
all of
it's,
us.
I'm
Okay.
definitely not saying it's
I'm
not.
just making sure that everyone gets
I don't think that's why he's implying.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm just
Okay,
saying
good.
that nutritionally, even if we did eat just vegetables, we're still not getting the nutritional value of the fruits and vegetables that we're physically eating. So we have to do a better job at growing more nutrient dense fruits and vegetables. That's all I'm saying.
And that's actually a great point, Roger, that you bring up. And then we come back to the discussion, how do we incentivize farmers to grow that, to take care of the soil, to re-nourish the soil, to introduce microbiomes or the bacteria into the soil. and make it more nutrient dense. And that is a big discussion, because currently the financial system, or our system, does not incentivize farmers financially to do the right thing. And this is one of the levers that will help move the needle in food systems the most, I believe, the financial incentives. And I'm very hopeful personally about programs such as carbon farming that will introduce a new revenue stream for farmers, in educational programs and new research coming out from academia that will hopefully help farmers do the right thing.
So do you think maybe context, place has something to do with this? Because my recent work in Zambia looking at food security at the household level, in some households, most households, we found out that they had sufficient food, but the problem was that young people, mostly teens, youth, they were the ones who were food insecure, because culturally, the kids are fed first, and then the dad, and then the mom eats leftovers, and then the young people eat last. So to me, that was really interesting. You said, raising this question, I'm like, how much of that is happening in the US? I'm not sure. But brings out the question from a participant here. You answered some of this question already, but the question is, how do we inform ourselves to make correct decisions? Because it seems to be common sense, but somehow we don't do it. So how can we make sure that we as individuals are making these correct decisions regarding food choices?
Yeah. Wow.
Beyond just reading the label.
Ask questions. Ask questions. And yes, do research and all that sort of thing, but ask questions. Don't take the ad that you see, the commercial, at face value. Just because the package has the word natural on it doesn't really mean anything. Yeah. And back to policy, we need to teach students in school life skills. We no longer teach home ec.
No.
We don't teach driver's ed. These kids can't change a tire or sew a button on. And we're expecting them to eat healthy. Come on.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Everyone needs to get back to basics. We have literally at least 2 or 3 generations of our society who's grown up on processed food, who don't know how to cook. So the students that come for their field trips, their parents don't know how to cook, because they grew up, their parents are in their 20s and 30s, maybe even 40s. Yeah. They grew up on processed. They don't know how to cook. They didn't have home ec.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We need to bring these skills back to the table. Mm-hmm. I have second graders that will come in, and they might know actually a little bit more about food and veggies because they watch the Food Network.
Yeah. Or they watch Nature Cat or something like that.
Yeah. They're really simple things that we need to do, but we need to do it as a collective.
Mm-hmm.
We need school systems to be involved. We need grandparents to be involved. We need to come together as a collective to push those skills forward. One of the things I tell my students, I said, if you have a grandparent or a great aunt or uncle who makes your favorite meal, learn from them how to make that amazing traditional dish, your family favorite, before they pass away. Because once they pass, you cannot Google that recipe. You think you can, but trust me, you cannot Google that recipe.
What do we do in a society that's continually struggling to break up that structure that you're talking about, that extended family structure?
I think I want to say that I've seen a glimpse of that coming back together because of COVID. I've seen more people cooking and connecting one-on-one because they were forced to. And I think some of these people have found, pleasure or comfort with it and will continue. My concern is that once we're back to quote normal, they'll just forget about it all. But the past year and a half, I've seen a bit more of that. I've seen more from scratch. There's been an uptick in interest on gardening and growing your own food, partly because of the supply chain issues. There's more conversation. Having conversations is a great start. It's brought awareness. The lack of connection that we've had because we were enclosed has made us talk about it and has made us be more introspective and aware that, this was really not a good thing I was doing.
Yeah.
Or maybe, God bless all the people that went and made sourdough starters. I mean, it took the pandemic to do that.
No, and I think this is key. That's what T describes is great. I work a lot with registered dietitians, and they talk about intuitive eating and the consciousness that T just talked about, just being more conscious about what we put into our bodies and about the effect that it has on our bodies. And here I'm just talking about the health and well-being aspects, the sustainability aspects, another topic, but just noticing how food makes us feel when we eat a burger as opposed to when we eat a salad. How are our energy levels? How much do we actually enjoy it? Do we know where the food is coming from? Do we appreciate the food? So this whole connectiveness that we have lost because our lives are so busy, I think is a big plus, I think, of COVID. And I hope we can preserve this a little bit, or we should be working on it. And for the environmental impacts, I can recommend a few sources to look up. So Project Drawdown, for example, offers many solutions for consumers that are interested in the environmental food impacts of food, or the Johns Hopkins University Center for a Livable Future. And I'm sure that Imelda can also share many more resources for those that are really interested in learning why are plant-rich diets actually better for the environment than our conventional diet that relies a lot on meat. So there are documentaries out there on Netflix, although they are always to be taken with a grain of salt because there's always some politics behind it. But these are great starters, and reading books and really asking the questions, such as just like T said, being interested and learning again about food.
We have a lot of interesting questions coming up here. One of it is I sense like there's a sense of helplessness a little bit on the part of the consumer or the individual. For example, there's so much focus on impacting the decisions of the government or corporations. So how can one individual's decisions have an impact in their own lives and the lives of their communities?
Well, this is like what I was going to tie together with what Francisca and T just said. Might not tie together, but my piece on it. I think I had 3 points to make on the comments. One was about just the Center for Nutritional Studies, which I follow and Urban Greeners follows. They have a program called Plant Pure Communities, and it teaches you all about eating healthy. And the reason why I liked it is because you hear people talk to you about eating all the time and they say, don't eat that and don't eat this. This tells you why. So it tells you that when you eat a piece of meat, you're automatically, immediately killing your kidneys. It tells you that. And it tells you exactly what that piece of meat is doing to your kidneys and how it's killing it and all of that. So you really are interested in, like Francisco was saying, about wanting to know what is happening when you eat a piece of food, right? How does your body feel? What is it affecting? What organ is it affecting? Because it does affect something if you're really paying attention. So we have to start eating for ourselves, and we have to start eating the things that our bodies are telling us that it requires, not what we think it needs. And Americans have been eating that way for way too long. We've been consuming. That's why we're so obese. right? So we're a very large population, and we have to stop eating and growing out of our clothes. And it's not a joke, but it's the reality. I've seen it in my lifetime where we've moved up sizes and sizes and sizes, 2 sizes, actually in my lifetime. I don't know about anybody older than me on this panel, but I've seen that, and I've seen us change that rather than adapting to our lifestyle and adapting to a live it, what I call a live it, which is where you eat to live, versus a diet where you eat to die. And we're eating to die right now. So we have to start changing around how we eat and eat to live. And that requires getting back to our natural body weights. And we each have one. And I have colleagues here in Miami who would tell you that once you figure that out for yourself, all those genetic things that you thought were genetic, that you thought your grandparents passed down to you and stuff, aren't genetic. It was just habitual habits that were taught and that were ingrained into your parents and your grandparents. And because they did it for so long, it was passed down to you in your genes. You know what I mean? But you could clear it out. It's not like something that's naturally there. It's something that was naturally put there, that was unnatural, and that was just taught and passed down genetically that way. So we can change all of this in ourselves. We also just have to start changing the way that our system looks at food, as we've been saying here in this entire call. And I think if, for instance, when I started studying food, I was studying Europe, right? Switzerland is very, they have a thing called farmscaping, where all the residents of a community get together and they farm, and they sit down and they farm their backyards and their front yards throughout the entire community. And that's where all of Urban Green Oaks was built off of, was that idea, right? Where you could come and everyone would grow something different. And when they grew it, then every week, everybody would get a share in that community, and they'll have food for the entire season. And then they'll have jarring classes and canning classes and preserving and all of that. So even when they weren't growing, they had stuff in the cupboard or the pantries and all of that good stuff. And then they had seasonal growing stuff. So I mean, other countries have shown us, who aren't interested in making money off their food and are interested in the long-term health and vitality of their citizens, have shown us that there's ways to do it. We here in America have so long driven away from that process since industrialization. You know what I mean? So when we go back to some of the things that we hear I hear so many kids tell me that the stuff that their grandparents said is so old and archaic, and I'm like, but they learned it from someone and it had value, and they're trying to teach it to you. So when the young people are saying that about what the old people are trying to teach them, you know there's a disconnect in knowledge and in passing down of traditions and history. And that's the problem. That's one of the major problems. There's many problems. But those are some of the things we're having this generational disconnect in how food was grown and so on. I mean, I grow food because I saw my great grandmother growing it up until she was in her 80s, you know, and that's why I grow food. And so we all have a connection like this to food, but if it's not kept up and it's not maintained, and then we depend on TV and fast foods and all of this stuff, we fall into that trap of continually, habitually being conditioned psychologically to be this way. I mean, we learned it in school, we learned it in Psych 101 and all of these classes. So, I mean, we are being conditioned this way. And if we don't break these habits within ourselves, we continually genetically pass this on to our children.
And I want to continue with that thought there, because we talked a lot here about education. We need to educate ourselves, incentivize, and you're talking about customs and why we need to pass them on. And there's a question here from a participant that says that a lot of what dictates what people eat is really traditions. We don't eat that. So how can we encourage healthy eating that takes into account cultural foods that make healthier versions of familiar dishes specific to a particular culture?
I'm sure T got something to say about that.
Yeah.
Good question, isn't it?
Great
But then
question.
I was like thinking, I'm like, in my house, so sometimes it's flip. Yeah, sometimes I cook and the kids are like, I don't want to eat that. I like to eat this. So yeah, what do you think?
I think obviously how the parent or the head of household is approaching it is key, you know, and you have to set an example by living that good life and making the better choices. But I think one thing culturally that I've noticed, you know, I'm an immigrant. I work with lots of immigrants or people that have come from other parts of the world or descendants of immigrants. And, what I have found when I look at traditional foods, regardless of where you're from, those traditional foods that people were eating, say, 100 years ago, not 50 years ago, but like 100, 150 years ago, they tend to be spot on for the nutritional requirements of the peoples of that region, using the locally grown available produce or proteins or seafoods or whatever they had literally in their backyard. So newer immigrants don't have access to some of these things, and due to everything from politics, cultural changes, economics, the past, say, 2 or 3 generations may have developed different sorts of eating habits, and based on what they have access to, based on their situation, wherever they're from. So I think, it's a deep question. And I think if you have a family that really wants to explore this, if they explored some of their own traditional cultural foods going back 150 years, I think they might be interested, and it might be actually more exciting than they think. And I bet they had consumptions of, they would have consumed more fruits and vegetables than they currently consume.
I always look at it from 2 perspectives, because I come from both, I guess. So in the Caribbean, I've seen my family become, over the years, as an American diet has been introduced into their natural, local lifestyle. I've seen them growing sicker, get more diabetes, and growing way more obese. And then from here, working in Miami and in the city, I normally engage more inner city youth from a cultural perspective, because in gardening, I think it is cultural. And when you've been distanced so long and doing the same thing over and over again for so long, I think that's the one small thing that I use anyway, to get folks not only reinterested again into gardening, and especially to get them out of that idea of it being a slave, sharecropping kind of thing, but to get them back into that idea of farming and gardening again, and the ancestral history of it, of where it came from. I try to tell them all the time, I'm like, Africans seeded the world. Without us, no one else would know how to farm or animal husbandry. So I'm like, go and look at your history. So I try to educate our kids on their history and show them that your culture and where you came from is way more important to you and how you eat than what you're eating now. And it has a way bigger impact. And I try to show them that each individual person comes from a different culture that has a different impact. Now, there may be underlying similarities, obviously, but then once you go regionally to different countries, then you have different tastes and spices and so on that everyone uses. And I think this is what activates the senses when it comes to eating healthy. I always approach eating from a child's perspective. So I always utilize the 5 senses, right? So you have to activate them all. And you have to look at colorful foods, you have to be spicy or whatever kind of taste you want. You have to have a beautiful aroma, great presentation, all of these things. And when you taste it in your mouth, it has to have texture. And I think that once you start having these aspects of food integrated back into eating, and it becomes a thing of sitting down. That's why I like sitting down with folks and eating and talking and having these discussions while we eat, because they activate something in a person that opens up a whole different experience to food that they've never had before. And it can become ancestral, it can become traditional, it could become cultural, but it's there that they never even knew they had it. And I think it starts opening up those pathways internally.
So we have a couple of questions here, and people have provided a few resources. I think we'll compile a list of those resources and we'll share them with you after this.
Imelda, I'm sorry. I just want to address really quickly this one question about the helplessness, because I think that's such a critical question. And I think this comes up in a lot of people's minds when they hear experts, so-called experts, talk about the challenges related to food, nutrition, the climate, and so on. It just becomes bigger and bigger. And I just want to encourage everyone here that is listening tonight, and I hope we could help a little bit with that. If not, we haven't done a good job. But I want you to understand, everyone, that we have such a big power as individuals when we make a consumption choice, when we call our elected officials, when we write an email, because our choice can make others to also change their behavior. Our call can make our elected official to reconsider. So that's the key of civic engagement. And I want us all to feel powerful about this, and that we have a choice, that we can change the system, because the system is just people. They might all work for a corporate, or they might be as part of the government, but they're people and they relate to stories. So I want to encourage everyone here to share your stories, share your perspective, share why you care about this, why you're passionate about this, and this will change. And it will change people's minds and hopefully the system.
And I'll follow up with 2 more questions to that one from participants. One of it to follow up on that is the helplessness with pricing. Like sometimes you want to eat healthy, but you cannot afford it. So how can we improve nutrition insecurity if we have this instance? And then the other question, then you can all chip in. We have a lot of students here listening, and they want to know how they can be involved, and if you can share your addresses or contact information.
In terms of pricing, grow your own food. That's all I can tell you. Grow your own food. But like we've been talking about here, I actually do a program with the University of Miami based on participatory budgeting, right? It's about teaching residents how to actively work with local government to change budgetary items to have an effect on how your community looks and how you impact your community as a resident. It's the same concept when it comes to food. We've been saying it, Francisca said it, T said it. Collectively, we can work together to change things. And that's what is needed, because if you're looking at corporations, individuals can't change corporate opinion anymore, but as a group and as a unified front, then collectively, of course, we can change opinions based on our buying power. Our buying power is amazing. And so we can change based on that alone. And the buying power comes from what we've been talking about here is consumerism. We have the choice to choose what we want. For instance, and I'll stop at this one, a colleague of mine who's in marketing made a reference a couple of months ago about how all those fruit cereals that we started growing up, that we grew up watching when we were kids, no longer have white kids in it. You know what I mean? Before, when I was a kid, it was all white kids in the Captain Crunch and the Rice Krispies and Apple Jacks and all of that. Now, when you look at them, the marketing has changed to more minority and colored children. You know what I mean? You have Latino, Asian, Black children in these commercials. Look at them and you'll be amazed, right? So we also have to look at who is marketing what to who. And if they can market it to us, then we definitely can change how they're marketing it to us as well.
And I know we are up on time, but please give us 5 minutes just to allow the presenters to go through this, and then I'll ask one last question and we'll wrap it up. So be patient with us. So we'll wrap it up soon. We want to be respectful to your time.
In terms of getting involved, so I would invite anyone interested becoming members of the United Nations Association Miami chapter. It's free to join as members for under 25-year-olds. So that's one option. We're also always seeking interns, volunteers, and help in the Better Food Alliance and the related organizations that are working with us. So these are 2 ways that I can contribute.
I'd like to answer the question on how to eat on a budget. Learn to cook. If you know how to cook, you can maximize the usage of everything that you purchase and not have much waste, if any. And learn how to Learn how to buy in a grocery store. I mean, there's so many little tricks that you can do if you're on a budget. I've been there. I have kids. I work. It's not impossible. It's work, but it's not impossible.
And then I'm going to ask the last question, and then I'll let Robin kind of give us the closing remarks. So the last question is, researchers are reporting that climate disruptions to agriculture and natural resources in Florida are projected to increase in the future. And Francisca, you kind of opened about this earlier. You talked about vulnerabilities within agriculture. And these impacts will be increasingly be negative because, you know, we've exceeded the thresholds. So will Florida's agriculture system adapt to climate change? Or put it another way, can we eat ourselves out of climate change?
I hope so. That's
Yep.
what my work is about. I guess I'll just do a brief description of the Food Academy. I teamed up with a partner in 2019, Studio James in Brazil, and we started what we call Food Resiliency Urban Infrastructure Tools, and we call it a Food Academy. And the idea was creating solutions from seeds of the community, for the community, and by the community. And the idea of the academy was to create the infrastructure in cities that can help them to become more food secure. You know, so the Food Academy, it's basically an outreach program based on engagement and education and entrepreneurship within the food system. And the aim is just to create viable solutions to the social determinants of health that plague a lot of the communities that I deal with. Stuff like T was talking about, high blood pressure, hypertension, heart disease, and so on like that. You know, and then we wanted to do this through partnership with local businesses, residents, government agencies, and with a focus on food security issues by increasing food production and reducing food waste. So in essence, what we're doing and why I started partnering up with all these other countries internationally was we started with a 3,000 square foot map of a spin farming model, which is small plot intensive. And then we applied technology to it. So we created sensors, we took a 360 camera shot, and then we uploaded it to a VR platform so we can have it on a computer. And the idea is to do this in every country that we're in. Kenya and Richmond, Virginia, which is the largest food desert per city size in the United States. And we have a branch here in Richmond to do it in St. Vincent. The more of these we can do as across, even here in Florida at small urban farms, and the more of this we do, the more then we can study the factors that affect the growing of food across the world. And then the better we can grow food for the world than just money, and thus reduce food waste across the world as well. And that's our thing. So we want to train stewards and we want to educate. It's all about educating and training and encouraging new technology. We're growing on the rooftops in the design district. There's a lot of factors we have to deal with, hurricanes and this and that, and doing microgreens and so on like that. We're looking at soil regeneration and different soil techniques, adding worm teas and different substrates that we're adding to the soil to build up the microbiome in the soil. I'm looking at water because rainwater is the most important water that we get. So I'm looking at how do we create rainwater at that pH and at that levels, and what are the different qualities of it. And that's what I think we should be studying, is studying food and the production of food on that level. And bringing it to the people and giving it to them on a platform that they can view and they can compare. So now I could look at Kenya, right, and take their map and overlay it on mine and say, okay, wow, you're 85% arid, and we're getting really bad here in Miami with monocropping. What do we do now to stop where you're at 20 years from now? You know what I mean? And put this in the hands of young people, because my generation and the generations after me have given up. You know, we think we don't have anything to do and to contribute to fighting this cause. So if we are giving up, then put it in the hands and let's start educating young people who aren't giving up and who understands that we're leaving them with a world here that is in disarray and that's going to be in disarray. And they need to have all the tools and all the equipment necessary to make the improvements that we failed to make over the past couple of 100 years. Urban Greenworks, UGW at www.urbangreenworks.org. Facebook is UGW Miami. Instagram is UGW Greenworks. Check us out, hit us up. We'll be here.
Well, we have an opportunity, if you're interested, if anyone out there is actually looking to be really involved with this movement that I'm involved with, I actually have a full-time position open. So I've shared the link with the moderator, with Imelda. So those of you who may be interested, check it out.
Thank you so much. And yes, we'll be following up with all these great resources we received today in a follow-up email. And thank you so much for our panelists for sharing your expertise. One of the good things about this job is every day you learn, you read something, but most importantly, once you hear something, it changes the way you think. And I'm hoping that our listeners also learned something here today, and hopefully it resonated with you and involved something in you to want to be a driver of change. With that, Robin, please take it on.
Thank you so much, Imelda, and thank you so much to our panelists for a really compelling and thought-provoking conversation. We heard all about how individuals, through their consumer choices, can play a role in what happens in our food systems, through thinking through how you educate yourself, how you learn about the food you eat, how you cook it, how you grow it, how you consume it. Also how you can be involved in policy solutions, right? How is the government spending money in our food systems? What should be done differently? Take a stand, contact your congressperson, work with one of these fabulous grassroots organizations right here in our local community, and be involved in the community. And T said something about, one of the takeaways from our COVID experience has been this new familial experience of cooking and connecting, right? Kind of getting back to more ancestral roots and heritage and culture. So there are lots of ways in which food becomes a vehicle for thinking through many things, both at the very close connected family level, but also at the national and global level. So I'm so grateful to all of our panelists. As I mentioned early on, we have a whole week of programming going on, including tomorrow from 11 to 2 at the Rock. There will be a fair food fair. So for those students who expressed interest in wanting to know how to get involved, please go to the Rock, check out all the organizations that are doing work in this area. They have lots of volunteer opportunities. So please take advantage of that. And then also we have a social media campaign for a virtual tropical fruit crunch. This is something that's happening globally. So every organization, university, institution that's doing programming for World Food Day is posting selfies of people eating fruit. Because we're in South Florida, we typically do tropical fruit. So, it's dragon fruit season, it's starfruit season. Think about what's in season locally, what you have access to, and send us a selfie of you eating your tropical fruit. So for Instagram, use the hashtag Food Heroes and tag us at Miami_civic engagement. Again, please feel free to visit the Food Day webpage that was posted in the chat, so you can see all of the different activities that are happening to celebrate Food Day. So thank you again to everyone for attending. We're so grateful, and we look forward to seeing you at more Food Day events. Thank you so much.